found grass seed in the building. I didn't realize it came with fertilizer. At least I think it's got fertilizer mixed in with it. So, but I was thinking about starting with the sower went out to sow the seeds. I'm not sure if we're told what kind of seed it was. I've always thought about it being grass seed for some reason. I realized as I thought about grass seed in the building when I was looking at that parable. This would have been a great demonstration outside because I would have given everybody some seed to sow. And we could have talked about the grass falling on the blacktop. Normally it won't grow there. Of course, if you don't want it to grow in your blacktop, it will. I heard someone say once that that's because of the fallen nature of the world. Things don't work the way they should. So that's why grass grows in the cracks in the parking lots. So, but one of the sermons I did once was entitled, "Which Soil Are You?" To think about the various soils that it falls on. In one version of the parable, the birds come and eat some of the seed. There's a big pile of seed underneath one of the bird feeders outside because the bird feeder's empty, but it's all on the ground. So it must be particular right now about what they're eating and where it comes from. But I thought this was a good way to demonstrate for the children especially. Some falls on good soil, some not so good soil. Some gets eaten by the birds, overtaken by weeds and vines. But every once in a while, some of that seed falls on good soil. It's heard and responded to, because after all, the seed represents the word of God being poured out upon us. Or we could, by extension, then talk about God's love and grace and mercy being good things that are poured out upon us, and so on. So, Genesis chapter 4, verses 23 and 24. Anybody know who Lamech is? I have to admit, I didn't remember Lamech.
What were the verses?
23 and 24 primarily. One day Lamech announced to his wives, Ada and Zillah, listen to me. Wives of Lamech, I need to tell you something. I killed a man who struck me. He was a young man who wounded me first. Here's how I see it. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then surely Lamech must be avenged 77 times. A parable? A truth? This is the Song of Lamech. It's part parable, part riddle, part proverb. So the parable of Lamech in Genesis chapter 4. Who is Lamech? He's descended from Cain, son of Enoch, father of Jubal. We're in chapter 4 of Genesis, starting at verse 17. A person that I did not remember. So what was the parable? He's speaking to his wives, and he has 2 of them. He's speaking to his wives, declaring that he has killed somebody, and he would do it again because he is vengeful. That's the gist of it. If Cain shall be avenged 7-fold, I will be avenged 70 times 7. He's inviting his wives to hear and everyone else. He's saying, I will defend myself, protect myself. I will avenge, seek revenge, be vengeful. So how is this a parable? He's discussing complex and threatening situations, saying what he's done
how it results in chaos. We don't know exactly why he has killed to start with, but what it's demonstrating is his thoughts and feelings, pride, vengeance, conceit, and so on. It's showing how as society grows, so does violence. This has been interpreted in many ways and with many understandings. Just before the song, we have verses that narrate Tubal-Cain developing an edged tool out of brass and iron. So it may have something to do with that. Now that he has this weapon, he can do whatever he wants to do. He has the power and control. So there are different levels to this. So all this makes it a parable. Lamech's attitude keeps mankind doomed and trapped in a cycle of this violent payback throughout our lives. What does this parable make you consider? If Lamech's sin is worse than Cain's, where does your sin rank? In light of the New Testament and the coming of Christ, as we consider our sinfulness, where are we at on the scale? Lamech epitomized sin and false worship of God. What do we do to still sin against God? When and where in our lives? When and where do we take the being of God upon ourselves, make ourselves God? Lamech is doing this in seeking revenge, in dismissing the gift of life, in dismissing the gifts that God had given him. Are you vengeful? Do you seek revenge? Are you conceited or arrogant? What does that look like in your life? How are you like Lamech? How is God changing you to be different, calling you to be different, working in you to be different? What happens when you take things in your own hands?
Personification is one of those figures of speech, and here wisdom is being described as a lady, as a woman. It started before in previously in Proverbs, at least in chapter 8, but I think it goes all the way back to the beginning. Lady Wisdom has built her house. She has supported it with 7 pillars. She's prepared a feast. She slaughtered her animals, poured spiced wine, and set her table. She has sent out her servants with the invitation to come to the party. She too calls out from the highest point of the city. Whoever is young and gullible, turn in here. You are welcome in this place. Then turning to those who are naive, she says, come in, eat my bread, drink my spiced wine, give up your gullible ways and naive thoughts, for true life, set your course for understanding. Went a little bit too far, sorry. Can you see What about the linen waistcloth of Jeremiah 13? I vaguely remember a portion of that.
Jeremiah 13.
Yep, Jeremiah 13, 1 to 11.
Oh, yeah.
The Lord is emphasizing that the nation is an evil people, disobedient, haughty, and stubborn, idolatrous, and impertinent. Hosea marries an adulterous wife. They have children, or Gomer does. Then Gomer runs off, and then Gomer is brought back by Hosea. That's the one I always had trouble understanding. One of those. It's like, why would God do this to you? Why would God make you do this, first of all, so that would happen? This is an acted out parable. The prophet is actually acting it out, following God's commands.
So, what is an enacted or acted out parable? Parables often have the dual role of prophesying and instructing, pointing out what is and what is to come. A prophetic act is something done at God's direction in the natural physical world that supports God's working in the spiritual world to bring forth results that would be manifested in the natural realm. So God uses natural things, ordinary things, to represent spiritual things that are really going to come about in the natural world. Sign acts are nonverbal actions and objects intentionally employed by the prophets so that the message content was communicated through them to the audience. Think of them as visual aids, sign acts. An iron pan representing a wall of iron. Prophets commanded to eat the scrolls. The parable of 2 sticks for the uniting of Judah and Israel. The boiling pot, and so on and so forth. If we look at Jeremiah's life, Jeremiah was commanded to take an earthen bottle, take it with him to the valley of the son of Hinnom, and the elders of the people there, and before them in their audience, break the bottle and prophesy. Jeremiah was to take the bonds and yokes and send them to various kings with the word of the Lord. Hananiah broke the yoke from Jeremiah's neck and prophesied. The visions, sayings of the prophets were enacted parables.
So the prophets were given many tools in many ways to pass on the message of God to the people. Okay. In the scripture we used last week from Hosea, I think it was, the Hosea says, God says he has given many visions and many parables. We know from what's already been indicated tonight, we're looking at enacted parables and spoken parables, that sometimes there's actions involved and sometimes it's just a spoken word. Sometimes it's a story. Sometimes some of them are longer than others and some of them are shorter than others. Each one has a purpose. But anyway, in addition to those, some of the prophets use symbolic visions and figurative prophecy and allegories and so on. that's
It'd be like Moses striking the rock or
Moses striking the rock, yeah.
parting the Red Sea.
Yeah, we forget that Moses basically was a prophet by definition,
Yeah, by definition.
where they acted out parables, more important messages than the spoken parables. Where I wonder why some were acted out and some were spoken. Of course, I guess it's like making a sermon. Some things lend itself to word pictures, some things lend itself to object lessons or personal experiences. So,
But then I wonder too, when you're talking about that, Chris, you know, Jesus says to his disciples, and I forget the exact word, that he speaks to them in parables
right.
so that only they would understand.
I always thought that was part of Jesus saying it's not my time yet. You know, he's on the one hand, he's exposing everybody to the kingdom. And at the same time, he's creating that core group that's going to carry on after he's done his time, after his time is done and it's time for him to move on. Enacted parables. Any examples of an enacted parable based on what we've talked about? I don't remember seeing too much about Elijah and Elisha. Their parables, they don't come up in any of the parable studies. Now that I think about it. Wonder why that is.
Parable of the woman, Tekoa,
Mm-hmm.
was all had to do, I'd forgotten about this, all had to do when David had banished his son Absalom.
Right.
And Joab had put this woman up to coming to David with this tale about, you know, her son and all of this. And so after all this takes place, David says to Joab tells him to bring his son back, to bring him from banishment back into the fold. But of course, you go to chapter 15, and his son's plotting rebellion against him then. So.
And then you think about Nathan using the parable
Right. For David.
And it's like gives a unique perspective. So David got two parables.
Right.
to
And they use
try to convince
parables
him.
to get the message to him.
Right.
Hey, you're messing up here.
What does it take? What does it take for us to get the message? Is sometimes the question, I think.
I don't think the Lord needs to hand everything to me on a silver platter or anything, but some of his parables are just a little hard to grasp for a lay person like myself.
It can be. Anyone in particular?
I'm still dumped about the mustard seed.
Mustard seed.
And the parables that they teach in Sunday school, growing up as a child, you know, they all have to be, you know, age appropriate and whatnot. So maybe that's where I didn't get my background on parables, was in Sunday school.